A couple of months ago, I got an offer to be flown out to Europe to go to Sennheiser and check out a mystery new headphone, which I presume is this one. And that trip was actually supposed to be scheduled for just a couple of days ago, which this released just a couple of days ago. Now, due to something that you will learn about in a couple of days from this channel, I unfortunately had to skip that trip, although it would have been a lot of fun. It would have been a great opportunity. And then for a while, I heard absolutely nothing. And then all of a sudden, I saw pop-ups all over the place for an HD490 headphone, a new headphone from Sennheiser. So I just went out and bought it. Today is the first impressions of the HD490 Pro Plus. Now, I gotta admit, when it comes to Sennheiser's naming schemes, I am at a total loss. I can't figure out what it means or why they add stuff to the names. Well, you had the HD800 and HD800S. The S was the upgraded model. Okay, I can kind of wrap my head around that. But then you had the HD660S and the 660S2, but there's no HD660. Okay, still weird. Then there's different versions. So there's the 600, the 650, the 660S. Okay, whatever. This one is not just the HD490, it's the HD490 Pro Plus, which is not a naming scheme that they've been using before on any of the other HD line, which is just, I can't understand it. Mini rant aside, let's talk about the 490, which is shaping up to actually be a pretty interesting little headphone. Okay, now at first, when it comes to a build that initially I actually thought was somewhat odd, I'm actually starting to appreciate and like a lot. First off, this is a lightweight headphone. This is only 260 grams, maintaining the same exact weight without a cable as the HD600 series. Big plus there. Now, around some of the headband mechanism, the yoke, and around the ear cups, this is using plastic, and then there is metal on the headband. And when it comes to the grills, it seems like the same grill material that is on the HD600 line. So you kind of see that crossover a little bit. Now, in my opinion, a huge upgrade over not just the 600 line, but also the 800 line. This now has articulating cups. Now, in a move that I'm not totally stoked about, they've moved to a locking 4-pin mini XLR that can plug into either side, but only connects into one side at a time and plays out of both ears. Now, I did take this headphone apart, and the mechanism itself to me looks pretty solid, so I'm not super worried about it. I don't love the actual connector personally. I like a breakaway connector that's not actually locking personally, but for a headphone that's marketed for professional use, I kind of get why they would do this. Although I do wish that they would adopt the same cable system that was on the HD600 line, just because people would already have aftermarket cables and their stock cables as backups, and it's just familiar. And quite frankly, it worked fine. There wasn't a giant need to improve or change it. There are a couple changes here that I think are an absolute win though. One of them is that this finally comes with a legitimate carry case. Like, you can actually take this somewhere. And inside of the carry case, it has an extra set of pads, which are different. We'll talk about that in the full review. I haven't used them yet. These pads are removable, and Sennheiser claims that they're washable, and they have a Velcro system for the headband. So the headband can also be removed, also washed, and put back on or exchanged for a new one. And usually Velcro stuff doesn't look like it attaches perfectly, but this actually looks like it attaches very professionally. You wouldn't even notice that it was Velcro. The extension for the headband does seem very solid. I will say this, which is a semi-complaint, semi-compliment. Sennheiser's headphones often feel a little bit cheap to me and a lot of other people, but historically with things like their HD600 and their HD800 line, which are made primarily of plastic, similar to this. And so while I do think that it does feel a little bit cheap, I think that their other headphones do too, but they last. So with enough time, with this new build, we will see how long it ends up holding up. I'm excited to test it out. When it comes to sound, there's two versions of Sennheiser for me. There's good Sennheiser and there's bad Sennheiser. And I'm happy to report that this is good Sennheiser. This is very reminiscent of the HD600 series. Luckily, I have an HD600 here to compare against. Because I'm super familiar with this headphone, it was a very easy comparison to draw really quick when I first started listening to this thing. And what I assume is very similar driver construction to what we've seen before, as we'll see in the teardown in a little bit. This carries over the Sennheiser sound very well. It seems like a new platform, but it doesn't sound like a totally new platform, which is a good thing and a bad thing. On the bad end, because it's a different line, people might be expecting something drastically different than what is currently offered. For example, the difference between the 600 series and the 800 series is a massive departure in sound quality. They sound drastically different. This is not a departure like that. It is a slight departure from what Sennheiser currently offers. Now, the good of this is that especially if you're coming from mixing and mastering on Sennheiser's headphones already, like the 600 line, the transition over to this is going to be easy as pie. It's going to be great. How they've carried over the tonality characteristics specifically is very, very impressive. The frequency response has seemed to be adjusted a little bit, and there's some other properties like sound staging that are kind of fun to play with on this headphone compared to something like the HD600. But I'm really impressed, and I actually think it's a good thing that they've kept the kind of Sennheiser tonality, especially if you're already used to working with that professionally. That's something that a lot of companies like Sony are not able to do with their professional line of products, is carry over a very specific sound from one product to another. So compared directly to the HD600, what are some of the changes that have happened here so far? Well, one of the big ones is a slight boost in bass response. In many ways, to me, this sounds immediately like what people would try to modify the HD600 to sound like through either EQ or actual physical modifications, or through the use of different amplifiers. This kind of does inherently what I think a lot of people are trying to achieve for bass out of the HD600. Now, I'd say compared to something like a Focal Alex, it doesn't quite stack up compared to that bass response. But for Sennheiser, it's actually a bit more rich and inviting and engaging than I think a lot of previous Sennheisers have been. It's also notable that this thing is actually very efficient, being about 130 ohms, which is about half the impedance of the 600, and it's got a sound pressure level of about 105 dB, so it's very easy to run. Now, from an audiophile approach, that means that this might be a little bit less good on different amplifiers, a little bit less fun and kind of interesting to play around with compared to its higher impedance brother. But honestly, when it comes to a professional headphone, you kind of want it to sound very similar regardless of what you're plugging it into. That way you have a reference point. So you can go from location to location to location and not really be subject to the characteristics of their sound gear, at least as minimally as possible. Comparing this to the 6XX, the lower mid-range is a lot cleaner sounding. It doesn't quite sound as muddy as the 6XX does, and it's not quite as full and rich there as the 6XX is. Now, when it comes to actually mastering, I think this is a benefit. When it comes to kind of a personal preference in sound, that's gonna be up to every individual. I could see a lot of people preferring the 6XX mids being a little bit darker and warmer than this is, but I could also see people preferring this. Now, when it comes to the flip side, which is a brighter mid-range headphone than the 6XX, the 600, this headphone is a little bit shoutier in a way that this headphone really cleans up a lot. So for vocals specifically, even amongst a difficult group of headphones to compare against, I think that this is actually holding up pretty well, though it does have some changes, and I kind of want to explore those more, especially with the alternative pads in the full review. So make sure you subscribe for that. Okay, I've only listened to this thing for a couple hours at this point. I'm gonna get started on the full review. I'm also gonna be doing a number of comparisons because I think this is actually a really killer headphone. I'm gonna do a bit of a teardown on this right now, so you can kind of see the internals because I know a lot of people are interested. And then after that, I'm gonna dip out of here and get started on the full review. So since people are always really interested in the internals of these, I thought since I paid for this and it's mine, it wasn't sent out by a company, I'm just gonna take it apart and see what's actually inside of it. I have an HD600 already pulled apart just to draw some comparisons to it because it kind of looks like a similar driver type, but I already spot a few differences. One of them is that this on the 490 is actually an angled driver. So it kind of follows a normal angle of an ear. It's more of a forward firing driver than the HD600 is. And the kit I'm using to pull this apart is the iFixit kit. I'll drop a link down below. These are some really high quality tools. I like them a lot. Now, since I haven't actually done the full review, I haven't really extensively listened to this. I want to be a little bit careful here. Don't want to pull on anything too hard. Kind of want to just give you a general look at what the internals of that look like. One, there's a ton of modding space in the actual cabinet here. Which is going to be interesting to see if people need to take advantage of that, although from what I've heard, it sounds pretty good already. A couple things I'm noticing, this looks very similar just as an outward appearance, so the internals are probably very different from the HD58X driver. And then you can see the different backing standards compared to something like an HD600. That connection point I was a little bit worried about, but it actually looks really solid, and those thin wires are actually pretty much standard for internals of a modern headphone because they don't really move a whole lot. That's going to be the internals. I'm not going to take it apart any further than here just because I need to listen to it. I need to make sure I don't break it and that the review is like actually solid and not hindered by anything. But yeah, that's what the internals look like. All right, guys, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you guys in the next video.